sideburns, put a mole on his face, changed the way that his hair was, and changed his voice a little bit. And policemen wanted posters up around while policemen would talk to him. He was a different, it's shape-shifting.
Yeah. You were born in Chicago, came here to London when you were 2, went back to America, to Grand Rapids, when you were 11.
Yeah.
It's a good chunk, that 9 years. It's an important chunk, according to people like Freud. Probably the most important chunk. So what do you feel looking back that you got out of London?
Well, for all intents and purposes, I felt like a British child. I mean, even though I kept being reminded by other people, by Brits, that my parents were Yanks, I had a fully formed British accent. I looked like a British child, and rosy cheeks, and dressed like a British child in the 70s, and so there was this other world, which was family in America, and every couple of years we would go and visit grandparents and cousins, and it seemed like they were the Americans, and I was the Brit, and I always stood out because of that. Everybody loves in America, everybody loves a kid with a British accent, and so I got a lot of attention for it. But I think, I was an only child until I was 13. And, both my parents were working very hard. We lived in a flat. They both went to school and had jobs. And it was quite a solitary childhood. And actually, I think it has greatly influenced me as an adult, because I like my solitude, and I'd be very, very happy to not see any other human beings for long periods of time and stay indoors. So that, I do think a lot of that has to do with finding ways to entertain myself. So that's what I think of when I think of my childhood in London. I think of playing alone in the back garden. I think of hedgerows. I think of blackberries, spider webs, and playgrounds. But always slightly on the outside, because of the fact that my parents were American, and I was never really a part of any group or community.
So when you went back to America, when you went back to America when you were 11, was that a shock?
It was a shock. It was a shock, and yet it was, there was a lot of excitement around it, because all of a sudden my dad had a proper job, was being paid proper money. We lived in a condominium rather than a basement flat. The loo was inside. There was 2 loos rather than one loo, And so a lot of excitement. I mean, starting school in an American grade school, all of a sudden coming in as a Brit, at first, lots of attention, lots of curiosity, and then lots of enemies as I started to take advantage of all the attention and started to bribe people with gum and stuff like that. So it was mixed, both feeling excited, that I should be excited because everything was so much better on the outside, and at the same time it felt incredibly foreign and different, and I felt quite out of place.
But you started to act a different person in a way, if I might put it that way.
Yeah.
From what I've read, in fact, if I was wrong, just check it out. But you became very punk. You became very disobedient.
Yeah.
Your people in your class voted you as the girl most likely to get arrested.
Yeah. I was arrested.
Other things, but that's the one that stuck with me.
Yeah.
So that was real. You were on the way towards delinquency.
Yeah, definitely.
Why was that?
Successfully.
Not
on the way. I actually succeeded in delinquency.
Gluing up the gates of the school.
Yeah.
That sort of
No, but I don't know. I don't know how much of. We kept going back to London, so my parents still had a flat in London. So we go in the summertime, and who I was and how I was, I guess, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, was, it's an Amway town, Republican town. Then to go back to central London as I'm getting older and starting to see a part of London that I never actually saw before because I was too young to necessarily be exposed to it. And feeling like, actually, that feels more, there's something about that feels more like who I am and where I belong. I ended up bringing a part of that to Grand Rapids. I remember we went to Camden Market and I bought clothes that felt like they represented who I actually really was, rather than this innocent girl in Grand Rapids. And it kind of flowed from there. The boyfriends that I ended up having were, there was a lot of drugs, a lot of acting out, a lot of delinquency, punk bands, and staying out all night, and all that kind of stuff.
You, at 14, you went into therapy, and you seem to have benefited greatly from it. You talk about it, and you've been in therapy ever since.
Yeah, it was so helpful to me at the time to have someone to talk about stuff with in a way that, for whatever reason, I didn't feel comfortable addressing with my parents, and really believe that the help that I got through the years because of that early therapy helped me to get through every challenging stage of my life, of which there was quite a bit. Yeah.
The thing that struck out for me about all of that was that when you were in a community play when you were 16, then, as it were, that was the light turned on.
Yeah.
And there are two things about that, it seems to me. First of all, it was a community of people doing what you were doing, so you weren't alone anymore.
Yeah.
People did these things. And secondly, it was a play. And you're acting. So can you tell us a bit about that, how that came about, and how, according to what you've said before, a light turned on, you thought, well, you tell me.
Yeah. As much as anything, it was that I had an inkling that there was something that I could do. And I don't know, I'd never really been in a school where acting was a part of the curriculum or the study, but it was just something that I knew. I knew that was something that was potentially in me that I wanted to do. And so then when I actively moved towards it, which again I can't remember what the impetus was at all, but when I did, and I experienced that on the stage for the first time, that there was a positive reaction to something that I was doing at a time when I was confused, troubled, not particularly happy. It was positive reinforcement. It was, I felt like I had worth and value, and that it was something, this sounds cheesy, but it's true, something to live for, something to look forward to, something to move towards. And it seemed like other people were confirming that. And so that really was the beginning of, that was the beginning.
Were there any actors you saw as models, you saw as people, I would like to be like that?
Well, I remember, I've spoken quite a lot about having seen out of Africa and being both struck by the strength of character of Karen Blixen. That's a controversial appeal, but also how extraordinary the transformation was in Meryl Streep, and I thought I can do that. I can do that, and so that was really the main. I don't know whether there was anything else or anyone else. It just felt like I could do that.
And how did you set about doing it?
I listened to people. I had an internship at a theatre, and in asking advice of what people did, they said go to college. There are a few colleges you could go to that are acting conservatories, and for some reason I chose one rather than the few. Just assumed that I would get in. It was an audition process where they where they break it down, and I don't know how many end up hundreds audition, and there were 20 at the time in the class, and that was the Goodman Theatre School, and that was it. I auditioned, I got in, I started college. That was what I was going to do.
And then the first part that drew you to the beginnings of public attention was in New York, off Broadway, Absent Friends, British play, and you got the outstanding newcomer in that. Brenda Mletton was in it.
Yeah.
That must have been fun.
It was fun. It was a bit of a whirlwind. Somebody else was cast in the role, a known actress, who then backed out after with only 2 weeks left of rehearsal. And so they were willing to take a risk on somebody who had never done off-Broadway before, had only done theatre college, but because I had a British accent, could do a British accent, they hired me. And that was a big learning curve, because I was undisciplined. Lynn Meadows was the director, and she had to sit me down on a few occasions and talk to me about timing and entrances and all that kind of stuff that I just, didn't really know or understand the importance of it.
But she was good by the sound of it.
I guess. I don't know. I don't have much memory. I do remember at one point emoting just a little too much during somebody else's emotive scene, getting my hands slapped for drawing the attention away. That was the last time I ever did that. But good lessons, hard lessons, really being caught up short in misbehaviour.
But the theatre was your North Star at that time. You weren't going to go into television, you weren't going to go to Los Angeles, you were going to stay in New York, possibly London, and go into the theatre.
Yeah. And then what happened?
And then what happened?
Well, I did, there was 1 year where I'd been waiting tables for what felt like an eon, and it was probably only about 6 months in New York, and no work, no anything, barely any auditions. And then on one day, I got 3 jobs, and so it was either to do the first production of Carol Churchill's Mad Forest off Broadway, which I slightly every once in a while wish that I had actually taken that. But the other course was that I could do another British play, The Philanthropist, at up in New Haven, Connecticut, the Long Wharf, and do an independent film. And the schedules of both of those could happen simultaneously. But because I was greedy, I chose the 2 rather than 1, which took me up to the Long Wharf. And then I met a young man who played the philanthropist, and I ended up moving to Los Angeles to visit him, and then selling my return ticket. So that's how that happened.
And then there's this business of getting into television, which you... At that time, it's worth saying, because television is now so powerful as a vehicle for drama and so good, and so wonderful. There always were good playwrights. There seems so many of them now, tackling such powerful issues right across the board, especially Britain and America, which are the only 2 places I know about. That time, people in the theatre here, but perhaps in your group too, thought, well, television was down there, and the thing was to be in theatre, or maybe in cinema, but television was down there.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a real sense of selling out if you did television back then, and there was very little on that, you know, was of any real value in the way that we value, you know, productions today, Netflix and HBO, and so I'd sworn off doing television. If I did auditions, you know, I was mostly doing auditions for film while I was in Los Angeles, and there's not much theatre auditions going on. And then, you know, wasn't getting much work, and then somebody sent me, you know, a TV pilot of The X-Files, and I'd done a tiny other television thing, you know, an episode on something, but that was really the first thing. And during those auditions, going to network to try and be cast in a TV show, the other young ladies that were auditioning with me were young women that I had been auditioning with in New York for theatre. You know, it was Jill Hennessy and Cynthia Nixon, and you know, that lot, which then went on to you know, to not get the X-Files because I got it, but they got, you know, had huge careers in television in their own right afterwards. Yeah, so everybody in that world was coming in, flying in to live that life.
But you got the X-Files part, and there was some surprise. You knew that you'd got it.
Yeah.
Why were you surprised?
Well, I didn't know anything. I mean, I was so green. I didn't even know what pilot season was. I didn't know what repeats were. I didn't actually realise that the shows that I would maybe watch after high school, like Brady Bunch and Gilligan's Island and all that nonsense, that those were repeats. I don't think it didn't clock to me what the whole network system was. And so when, you know, I remember when it was called back a couple times, and then I was going to go to network, I had to ask all the questions. What do you mean network? What does that mean? What do I do? You know, everybody else who was there at Penton Network 100 times already knew what the game was, knew what the racket was, and I went in just completely naive, and you know, I came in wearing oversized. I borrowed somebody's suit to wear for Scully, and it was like 3 sizes too big for me. I was told if I was going to come back for an audition that I needed to wear something more streamlined, was the word.
Did you?
I did, yes, I did. I certainly didn't go miniskirt, which I think is what they were after. But I definitely borrowed a different suit that fit.
But the writer was determined to keep you, wasn't he?
Yeah.
To fight.
Yeah.
And he won.
And he did. He really fought. Yeah.
What? And maybe this is too insensitive, or what did he want that he saw in you and not all the others that were turning up?
Well, I think he knew what the network was after. You know, what Fox had prior to that. I can't remember whether Baywatch was actually on Fox, but that was what was on telly. You know, you didn't have an example of, you know, an independent, strong female character on network television at the time. And that's who he had written. And he wasn't going to let the network turn that into something that was predictable and out of the character that he had created. You know, predictable for television at the time. So, you know, he saw something in my, you know, dowdy, very focused, playing at intellectual version of Scully that was slightly awkward and slightly, you know, just very, very nerdy and wordy, and you know, that's who he had created. He hadn't created a bombshell.
But you sort of puncture the premise of the thing again and again, your character, and that's fascinating. You do it for 200 episodes, no?
Yeah.
You just kept
over.
Yeah.
Over 200. Yeah.